Good morning. Welcome to our daily devotion. It is Friday, January 22nd. As always, I thank those of you that tune in to this at 8 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock to some of you. Appreciate your loyalty. God honors this. Trust me, God honors the fact that you make a commitment like this to Him. He will grow your faith tremendously. So I appreciate each one of you. Good morning, Mary. Good morning, Rose. Sherry. Good morning. We're in Matthew, where Jesus is teaching us how to pray. And we've looked at a lot of different ones already. Now he's Abba, our Father, but we're to respect Him. And now we're getting to the part where it says, Jesus says, and lead us not into temptation. Now we're talking to the Father. We're talking to God. Good morning, Grace. Good morning, John. Good morning, Marcy. Marcy, I hear you're heading to Oregon to take care of your brother. That's so, God will bless you for that. Doesn't it sound like if you're praying it, give us this day our daily bread, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation. It's like, does God, just reading this makes it sound like we're praying that God won't lead us into temptation. It's like saying that God would do something like that. Morning, Michelle. But let me just read something so we don't misunderstand what they're saying here. In James 1:13, God tells us this, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does He tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by their own evil desire they are dragged away and enticed. Then after desire is conceived to give birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Now, this is what God is telling us here. We have our own evil desires, and that allow us to be lured into sin. It says no one should say God is tempting. Each one of us is tempted by our own evil desires, and then we're dragged away and enticed. Let me give you an example. It would be like an alcoholic struggling with alcoholism, tempted and then he goes into a bar or a nightclub. He or she. It's like they're putting themselves right into the temptation. A sexaholic going to a strip club. They're putting themselves right into temptation. And that's what God is telling us here, that it's our own evil desires. When we do these things, then that gives birth to sin. When we put ourselves we allow the temptation, then it gives birth to sin. And if we keep on doing it, it says, then it leads to death, to separation from God. So it's ourselves that allow ourselves to be tempted. It's like, so many people, so the devil made me do it. It's like, no, you allowed yourself to do it. Good morning, Roz. You allowed yourself to do it. So going back to what is Jesus really saying then when He says, lead us not into temptation? What He's really saying is, pray that God would help us not to be led into temptation. If we were to read it in the original Greek, it's like saying, Jesus, help us not to be led into temptation. Like Jesus will help us. And here's why. I'm going to read to you in Hebrews 4:15. It says this, for we do not have a high priest, Jesus, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet was without sin. The reason that Jesus can help us to be led into temptation, because he was tempted just like we were. He lived His life here on earth just like we did. He can relate to us. He can relate to the temptations that we're going through, but He can help us because He never allowed Himself to give in to sin. But He knows exactly what we are going through when we're tempted. And then in Hebrews 2:18, God tells us this, because He Himself suffered when He was tempted, He is able to help those who are also being tempted. He is able to help us. That's why when we read this, lead us not into temptation, it's like Jesus, help us not to be, literally it's saying, Jesus, help us not to be led into temptation, because you identify with us. You know what we're being tempted for. You went through that, but you never gave into it. So help us so that we don't give into it, is what they're really saying. But here's the problem. Okay? 1 Corinthians 10:13 tells us this. It says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Now here's the kicker. We can resist, we can overcome those temptations. We are capable of overcoming those temptations. Good morning, Ronnie. Good morning, Christina. Good morning, Cheryl. Oh, Cheryl, wow, great to see you. He has given us a way out. He is there to help us when we're experiencing temptation. He promises you that he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. It's almost like, and he promises a way out of each one. It's almost like we have no excuse. It's like we have no excuse to give in to sin, because he promises us that we can overcome it. He did. Jesus did. Now, granted, he was God. But it's not like we can. It's not like saying, I just can't help myself. I just can't help myself. I'm sorry, but I just can't help myself. How many times have you said that? I just can't help myself. And yet, what does God tell us? God said, he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are capable of bearing. You are capable of saying no. Now, here's the problem. Matthew 26, verse 41 tells us this. Peter was in the garden with Jesus when they were praying. He says, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. So what Jesus is saying is, your spirit right now, when you're tempted, your spirit is saying, no, I'm not going to give into this. I'm not going to give this. And you may even rely on the scriptures that we read this morning. You may even rely on them and say, God, you have promised me a way out of this. So your spirit is willing, but the body is weak. The body is weak. And what happens? We give in to sin. We give into the temptation. We allow that temptation to lure us until it becomes a sin. We all struggle with this. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, Kathy. We all struggle with this. We all struggle with sin. Wouldn't you love it if you never ever sinned again? But we do all fall into sin. And so that's why in 1 John, Jesus tells us to confess those sins, confess them to God. And says, and God is faithful and just, and he will forgive us of those sins, and he will make us righteous, right again with God. So even though our spirit is willing and we don't want to sin, our body is so remember what Paul said, the things I want to do, I end up not doing. And the things I don't want to do, I end up doing because I'm weak. Paul, the great Paul, shared that he struggled with that. So it would only be natural that we would also struggle in those same ways. So when we do give into that sin, into that, make certain that you don't get caught in that sin. Because it says, scriptures, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. But the key is not to get caught in a sin to where you just keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. What you have to do is you have to go to God then and say, God, I confess this sin. And I'm sorry for this sin. And then God promises us that he will forgive us that sin, and he will justify us and make us right with him. So confess your sin. Whenever someone tells me that they don't feel close to God. I don't know how many times I've met with someone and they just, I just don't feel close to God. I used to feel so close to him. I just don't feel that close to him anymore now. Majority of time, it's because they're caught in a sin. They're caught, and when you're caught in sin and you don't confess it, you're you're distant from God. Sin separates us from God. So you're distant from God. So confess those sins. And know this, that the stronger you are in your faith, the better chance you have of resisting those temptations. When you're weak in your faith and you're not spending time with the Lord in prayer and in His Word, you become weaker. You become weaker, and it's easier to give in to the temptations. But when you spend time in His Word and you spend time in prayer, you become stronger and better equipped to be able to resist those temptations. But you're going to sin. So the key is confess that sin. Confess it. Tell God the sins that you're committing, and He'll make you right with Him. God bless you. Thanks for joining. There's nothing tonight, so I'll see you again tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. As always, I encourage you to share these videos so we can get them out to more and more people, to Christians, to unbelievers. I really believe that an unbeliever will watch a video, as I shared last night in my Bible study, way more than that unbeliever would ever go step foot into a church. So we need to share these videos to get them out to more and more people. God bless you. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.